Heart is with them, Bob. We thought we might try to flesh out some of the details that we've been getting about what it's like up there. And ask General Wagner to tell us, we talk about the forces that are up there, what those forces are composed of. And that would be mobile artillery, armored personnel carriers, the tank and the Apache helicopter. Let's start at the beginning, the M109. And we have some information and some graphics about this. This is what amounts to a self-propelled howitzer, is it not, General?
Bob, these are the systems that make a mounted or an armored division work, and we're going to start from the rear and work up. This is a self-propelled artillery piece. It throws a large HE round almost 30 miles. The thing you have to understand about this is with every small unit to the front, there's a small fire direction team that can direct this fire right in front of our advancing troops.
Now, that goes along with the Bradley fighting vehicle, and basically that is a personnel carrier.
That's an infantry carrier, carries 9 infantrymen. It is armed with a twin-tow missile, which is an anti-tank defeating. It also has a 25-millimeter chain gun, which will defeat all Soviet-made armored personnel systems. It's a very powerful system in itself. It carries an infantry squad. All of our mounted squads travel in this vehicle.
And then from above, while all that is going on, while the Bradley is moving forward along with that self-propelled artillery, from up above the Apache attack helicopter. And unlike tank battles in the past, this is something new, is it not, General?
Yes, and the Apache has had tremendous success. As you know, they've captured a lot of people on the ground, which is amazing. First time in history. This is equipped with a Hellfire anti-tank system, rocket system. It has the Hydra 70 anti-personnel rocket system. And it also has a 30-millimeter chain gun. So it has a system that takes out dismounted personnel, indirect fire, its own organic artillery, and an anti-tank rocket all in a single helicopter, Bob. An awesome weapon system, all-weather capability.
And then the backbone of this force, absolutely, and that is the M1 tank. And we want to look at that now. Tell us about this tank, General.
Well, of course, I'm a tanker, and this is near my heart. This is the centerpiece of the battle that we will see. The most awesome weapon system in the theater on the ground. 67 tons of rolling death, 125-millimeter gun, fires at night, fires under all kinds of conditions, fires on the move as accurately as it fires from a static position. An awesome system, the best tank in the world.
And also the fastest.
And it will prove it.
All right, well, that's what it looks like up there, Dan.
Thanks, Bob. Dateline Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. A Patriot missile knocked out a Scud fired as the ground war offensive began. A Scud was fired at Riyadh. A Patriot missile is reported knocked it out at 30,000 feet. It's also reported by the Saudis that Allied forces have captured the small island of Falaka. That island commands the sea approaches to Kuwait City. It was captured right at the start of the ground phase of the Gulf War. U.S. Marines moved in and captured it. Fighting was said to be heavy on that island. Now, we're going to take a station break, and our CBS News live coverage of the beginning of the ground war will continue after we take this opportunity to let our stations identify themselves.
This is CBS.
News on the Hour brought to you by Smith's. Nobody cares like Smith's.
You're watching Coin TV. This is Newsroom 6.
Here's the latest from the newsroom. Throughout Portland tonight, people are reacting to the start of the Persian Gulf ground war. One Portland mother with a son in the Gulf says she is extremely worried. And Rabbi Emanuel Rose told Newsroom 6 it is unfortunate it takes a war to deal with people like Saddam Hussein. We will return to Dan Rather for a summary of events in the Gulf War.
The Ford truck leadership sell-down continues. 7,000 trucks.
7,000 trucks?
17 days.
17 days?
The best selection ever of F-150s, F-250s, F-350s, 4x4s, and Super Cabs.
7,000 trucks? 17 days?
It's the Northwest Ford Dealers Truck Leadership Sell-Down. Great selection, great prices, but it all ends February 24th. See it at your local Northwest Ford dealer today.
watching CBS News, continuing coverage of the war in the Gulf. From Saudi Arabia, here is Dan Rather.
Bringing you up to date now on the war, these are some of the headlines. President Bush orders Iraq ejected from Kuwait. Secretary of Defense Cheney suspends news briefing, orders a virtual news blackout. Allied forces enter Kuwait. President Bush 1 hour ago made it official.
The liberation of Kuwait has now entered a final phase. I have complete confidence in the ability of the coalition forces swiftly and decisively to accomplish their mission.
With that, the president announced that he has ordered ground forces to, quote, eject Iraq from Kuwait. And the president asked all Americans to pray for the U.S. and allied forces at the front. Those forces have begun a drive into Kuwait and, we believe, a drive into southern Iraq, penetrating as much as a dozen miles into Kuwait in the last report and pushing through the first line of Iraqi defenses. With the ground war now underway, Defense Secretary Cheney tonight imposed the virtual news blackout.
When it is safe to begin discussing the operation, we will do so in as much detail as we prudently can. But for now, our regular briefing schedule here at the Pentagon and in Riyadh is suspended until further notice.
Meanwhile, Iraq's scorched earth policy against Kuwait continues. More than 100 oil wells reported still blazing, some 200 oil facilities in total set to the torch, and the skies over Kuwait are choked with high, billowing, thick smoke. Now, that's a quick summary of where we stand at this hour in the war. Official Saudi Arabian television reports that Allied troops have crossed the border into Iraqi-occupied Kuwait. Saudi television says the joint forces have intensified their ground strikes in the last few hours on the Iraqi positions along the Kuwaiti border. Saudi Arabian television also says responsible sources in the joint forces said that some troops were able to cross the Kuwaiti border and infiltrate areas near the city of Al-Wafra. You may recall that Wafra was, there was a number of oil installations there, but more importantly, in the very early stages of the war, Iraqi forces mounted some thrust into Saudi Arabia from that area. U.S. Marines and Saudi forces repelled them. That was about the time of the Battle of Kafja, which was the abandoned city right over near the coast. We said to you earlier that right at the start of the offensive, which pits at least 1 million men against one another, roughly 500,000 on the Iraqi side. That's the number of Iraqi troops believed to be in southern Iraq and in Kuwait. And with somewhat more than that, some say 500,000 plus on the U.S. and Allied side. If you count those at sea, the Allied side may get up to some 700,000. Wyatt Andrews is at the White House. Wyatt?
Dan, we have some new and important details about how the president made this very risky and important decision to go from the air war to the ground war. Taking everybody back now 12 days to a week ago Monday, when the president was entertaining in the residence here the return visit of Secretary of State Cheney and Joint Chiefs Chairman Colin Powell, who had just returned from Saudi Arabia. Folks might recall that the president at that time came out to the Rose Garden and said that the air war was going well and that he wouldn't launch a ground war until he got further advice from his commanders. As it turns out, some days after that, that would have been in the middle of last week, General Schwarzkopf did report back through the chain of command that he would be ready within a certain window. And some days after that, presumably around a week ago now, General Schwarzkopf gave a go time of 8 p.m. tonight, that is Saturday night, February 23rd, and that for at least the last week or so, that has been the go date. And the president gave general approval that if everything else was going along well, that is no diplomacy, no withdrawal by the Iraqis, General Schwarzkopf had that go-ahead. Significant because remember that last Thursday night came in the Soviet peace proposal, in which the Soviets said that the Iraqis had agreed to withdraw, but then came all the list of conditions, including the repeal of the UN resolutions and the erasure of all the sanctions. It was at that point, huddling with advisors here at the White House, the president decided that in order to meet General Schwarzkopf's go date, he would have to lay down the noon deadline of Saturday, which the president then did, as we all recall, last Friday morning. Perhaps the bottom line of all of this is that when Iraq did not meet the president's noon deadline today, General Schwarzkopf had the go-ahead in his hand.
Marlon Fitzwater, who did this briefing for reporters, was not clear on whether or not there was a definitive phone call, say, from Secretary Cheney or Chairman Powell to Schwarzkopf, but significant to know that 8 p.m. tonight, Soviet offer or no Soviet offer, if Iraq had not withdrawn, that has been the go date for at least 5 or 6 days. Dan?
Thanks, Wyatt. In the early stages of the ground war, at night, when U.S. forces with their night fighting equipment had the advantage, one weapon, along with a number of others, stood out. And joining me now is Martha Teichner to tell us about that weapon. Martha?
It's the Apache helicopter. It has been very controversial throughout the last few months because of questions raised about its maintenance and its ability to perform under heavy-duty sand conditions and that sort of thing. From now on, it won't just be conducting occasional raids across the border. It will be in heavy, daily, regular mission activity, and it will not have the luxury of the kind of velvet glove maintenance it's had for a long time. And now we'll really see how it's going to perform. Apaches own the night. That's what one Apache pilot told me. They're black and they're quiet. The pilot and the gunner look through night vision eyepieces and see their targets lit up like day. The Apache is a tank killer. It will sneak past advancing troops deep behind enemy lines and launch its $30,000 Hellfire missiles. All the pilot has to do is turn his head, and his helmet points the Apache's weapons. Targets are spotted by laser. In the cockpit, it looks like a video game as the Apache closes in. Dan, each one of these helicopters has in its cockpit attached to the whole laser spotting device a television camera that takes pictures of everything that the pilot sees. And this is used not only to critique afterward the way the pilots have performed and the gunners have performed, it also is used as a tool for intelligence gathering because it can record pictures of everything in the path on the way to the target.
It's a night stalker and a night killer. I want to read Dateline Northern Saudi Arabia. We can't say exactly where. There is a report that the first video of the Gulf War ground fighting to be screened for reporters showed an Apache helicopter in a night attack. Now, I've said before and I've say again, there's some rather weird rules out here that reporters were allowed, some selected reporters, to see this video, but you're not allowed to see it. I can't truthfully say to you I know why, but here's the point. That through that night seeing and recording device that Martha described, the reporters described seeing bewildered and terrified Iraqi infantrymen shot to pieces, blown apart in the dark by the U.S. Apaches. One by one, they were cut down in the middle of the night by an enemy they couldn't see. Some were blown to bits by bursts of exploding cannon shells. And when you look at the film, it has a video game quality to it. But on the battlefield, out there in the dark, and particularly for those on the receiving end, there's nothing video game about it. It is a night hell. Some of the Iraqis, you could see it, were jarred from their sleep, disoriented, and began fleeing from their bunkers under the firestorm that the Apache helicopters laid down. Even hardened soldiers held their breath when it was shown in the briefing tent for the Army's 18th Airborne Corps, for whom the ground war has already begun. Joining me now from Washington is Phoebe Marr of the National Defense University. Thanks for being with us. How can we expect the Iraqi army to fight?
Well, I think, as far as we can tell, that its reaction is going to be mixed. I wouldn't expect those frontline conscripts to fight very well. As most people have said, they're the weakest link. However, we may get a little tougher battle from the mechanized divisions in the interior of Kuwait and from the Republican Guard, who are more seasoned, who are more hardened, and more disciplined.
There's been a lot of talk about taking on the Republican Guard, and we know it's been well publicized, and nobody's talking about any secrets here, that the flanking movement, the main thrust of the Allied force through southern Iraq, has as its purpose, more, to draw the Republican Guard out into open desert warfare where the air power of the U.S. and Allied forces could be leveraged. Your guess, your estimate, will the Guard come out into that desert warfare or stay hunkered down in their fixed positions or move, fall back into Basra?
I think they're going to put up some kind of a fight. they would be disgraced. They would not be performing their purpose, and I think that they would attempt to put up some kind of a fight rather than simply to retreat to Basra. But it's difficult to say, of course.
Of course, it's difficult to say, and it's one of the unknowns. And General Norman Schwarzkopf put together a bold, quick-strike plan, but it has risks, and one of the risks is trying to figure out what the Republican Guard will do. Of course, we've heard about Saddam's possible surprises. List for us what you think some of those surprises could be, Ms. Marr.
Well, he's already given us a couple. Of course, the burning of the oil wells in Kuwait, the scorched earth policy is probably not too much of a surprise because he warned us that he was going to do it. He's according to reports, now killing Kuwaitis, and there is also, of course, the fear of chemical weapons.
Any doubt in your mind that he will use chemical weapons as the ground war develops, if he has any capability of doing so?
I believe he probably will. My feeling is that it might be a last resort rather than a first resort, but of course he's used them before. Particularly when he gets his back to the wall. And as this battle starts to go against him, I think we have to take that into consideration.
The Allied commanders, particularly the U.S. commanders, have been making a point of saying he'd better not use the chemical weapons because if he does, that will put the conflict on a whole different basis. They have been issuing warning after warning, threat after threat to him. Could that deter him from using the chemical weapons, in your opinion?
Now, run out of options. In fact, he might even welcome this war. He said he wanted to draw us into a long war of attrition, the mother of battles. I think he even has in his mind that we might suffer enough casualties to renege, or at least to get him better ceasefire terms. And therefore, he must inflict some kind of casualties on us. I believe he's a survivor, incidentally. I think he thinks he can survive this battle. That, of course, is his view.
Thank you very much. That, of course, is his view. We've mentioned it a number of times. He has a lifetime pattern of figuring out what it takes to survive and then surviving. This, of course, is his maximum challenge. Thank you very much, Phoebe Marr. Let's go to John Blackstone in San Francisco, who watched the president's speech from the west coast of the United States. John?
Dan, when the president began speaking here in San Francisco tonight, of course, the stores were still open, people were still out shopping, but when the president came on the air, everyone stopped and listened.
This very moment are risking their lives for their country and for all of us. May God bless and protect each and every one of them.
It's very sad, but I guess it has to be done.
Kind of halfway expected it. I think the president did a good job of trying to be diplomatic about it as much as he possibly could.
It's scary to think about it, but we're the best trained army in the world. We have the best weapons. We're, if we can't stop them, nobody can.
Among those watching with interest tonight, Kathy Kaiser, originally of Miami, but for the past year living in Saudi Arabia, where her husband is working, and now visiting San Francisco. And you, in fact, in the past few months have met many of the American military over there. How are you feeling tonight, knowing that they're going off into battle?
We feel very sorry that they have to be over there going through this, but at the same time, we feel glad that they're finally going in and going to get it done.
It must have been tense times for you in the past months over there.
Yes, definitely it has.
Does this seem like the end of it, perhaps?
We hope so. We definitely hope so.
Dan, when the president asked tonight that people say a prayer for the people going into battle tonight, the people we were talking to all said they would pause and do that. Dan?
John Blackstone, thanks. Here are the war headlines of the hour. President Bush tells the nation the ground war has started. Defense Secretary Cheney says information will be restricted. Hundreds of Kuwaiti oil fields are in flames. I should say hundreds of oil wells are in flames. As expected, President Bush announced that the start of the ground war happened earlier this evening. He made that announcement in a 2-minute address to the nation. He called it the final phase in the campaign to evict Iraq from Kuwait. The president asked the nation to pray for all coalition forces. Defense Secretary Cheney says information on troop movements and other things about the war will be severely restricted, at least for a while, and military briefings have been suspended. An Iraqi Scuds, or parts of it at least, hit a school in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia tonight. No casualties, but quite a bit of damage. It had been hit by a Patriot missile before it fell on the school. Iraq reportedly has set fire to nearly 200 Kuwaiti oil wells now as it continues its scorched earth policy. Kuwait has been put to the torch. Kuwait is burning. Joining me now is Dr. Bob Arnott. Doctor, thanks for coming back with us again. What kind of preparations are they making here for U.S. casualties?
Well, Dan, they're enormous. They have 3 times the number of beds here than they had in the height of Vietnam. They have twice the transport capability. The reason is that compared to Vietnam, there are going to be catastrophic injuries, at least on the Iraqi side, probably on our side too, in terms of terrible burns, terrible blast injuries. And so they've really done a magnificent job putting together a very sophisticated medical system. Now, it is an echelon system. It begins with what they call buddy care. That is, you may have every 4th man in your battalion trained to give you first aid, a corpsman there. Then it moves back to what we call a battalion aid station. I'm going to show you what this looks like. Only 1 to 5 kilometers back from the front. You see, they will have surgeons here. They'll be able to stop bleeding, put in intravenous lines. They'll evaluate this person to see where they should go next. Now, they have this card on them. As they're writing the card out, they are trying to, in essence, triage them. Is this someone who's expectant, who's not going to make it? Is it someone who they will be able to treat life-saving, limb-saving surgery right away? Or is it someone who has to be transferred further back? Now, there are a couple of choke points here. One is in the original triage. What they try and do is to open up that choke point by having huge clearing platoons. They might have 4 tents worth of doctors and nurses and medics. The other important thing is getting them out fast enough to make way for more casualties. They will have regular scheduled flights of C-141s going almost directly from the battlefield, say 30 or 40 miles back to Europe. Tactical flights with C-130s coming back here and other places in theater to be able to treat patients. So we're hopeful that this is going to be a terrific system. They track them, by the way, right from the very front with a system called JAMRO. That is, they know every patient, where they go, where there's a spare bed. They can even mark which bed they might go to in a hospital in Germany from when they leave the front.
We've all seen MASH, which was based on battlefield surgical units in the Korean War. How much has battlefield medicine changed since then?
Unfortunately, battlefield medicine itself has not changed all that much. The tactics have. For instance, out here they have a thing called a FAST team, where they will be able to drop doctors, nurses, anesthetists out of an airplane at 500 feet. They'll jump into a combat zone. They'll parachute out of an airplane. These are doctors and anesthetists. They will be able to operate within a mile or so of the front to do that life-saving kind of surgery. Surgery basically hasn't changed, though, since Vietnam or even Korea.
Dr. Bob Arnott, thank you very much. Keeping in mind that General Norman Schwarzkopf's his plan is to keep the pressure on, unrelenting pressure on the ground against Saddam Hussein's forces, the same way they kept unrelenting pressure on him with the air war, with the specific goal of keeping U.S. and Allied casualties as low as possible. And that ground pressure, which kicked off tonight about 8 p.m. U.S. time, the big ground offensive, it has some risks. It's a bold plan. It's designed to keep casualties as low as possible. Let's go to New York now, and CBS News correspondent Bob Schieffer for a briefing with our military consultants. Bob?
Well, Dan, there is one scrap of hard news right now with the news blackout on. We're not going to get very much, but the Kuwaiti news agency reports that Allied forces have captured the small island of Falaka Island, and I'm told that's how do you say it out in that part of the world, General? Falaka Island. And General Christ, you've been on that island. Explain to us what it is and what's the significance of that news.
Bob, Falaka Island absolutely guards the approaches to Kuwait City. It's only 15 miles off the coast of Falaka. So anything that is to move from the sea toward Kuwait, toward the Bubiyan Island, toward the north, or even the other side of Kuwait City, has to pass by that island. It's a fortified island. It had anti-aircraft missiles on it, it had tanks on it, and it had troops on it. So you can see it's absolutely key to anything that the amphibious forces are going to do. Clearly, the removal of that island opens up all of those approaches and the options that General Schwarzkopf might have for an amphibious operation.
Well, you've been out there, General. Do people live there in normal times?
No, Falaka Island has always been a military island. It's only about 10 miles long, I guess, about 2 miles wide. There's no trees or anything on it, but there's a lot of military positions, all of them dug in. So it is truly a military island. It's a military island because it's a little bit like the Gibraltar, I guess, of the Kuwait area.
Now, I'm just thinking back what we've known that has happened out in that part of the sea. Minesweepers have been out there for the past 8 days. The battleship Missouri has moved into that area, has been firing its 16-inch guns out there. It seems to me a week or so ago the Allies took another little island out there. It would appear that they're very much in control of that area now.
Exactly what happened. They started first with the Dora Field, which is down in this area. Then they took Giroux Island, which is over here, Maridam Island, which is over here. Then they began to move up toward the channels toward the north. They ran into some mines up in this area up in here and had to get them cleared. There were about 22 or so mines in there. But having done that, you see, now the coast is clear to come up. This is out of the way, the last obstacle to any seaborne movement, and in fact to bring the naval gunfire ships up, Bob. It may be not only the amphibious operations, but they're going to want to hit this coast along in here. The 16-inch guns of Missouri and Wisconsin, the 5-inch guns which were aboard the other small ships, can lay a lot of stuff along that line. Now we're able to do that.
So I would take it that General Schwarzkopf, if he decides to use the amphibious option, that is now very much an option.
Without a doubt. He's truly cleared the way for a number of options that he might have against this area. By taking out Falaka up here, he may hold them off. The Kuwaitis don't know what's going on, and certainly the Iraqis have no idea what these things mean out there, except they know they're there, and there's 17,000 of them out there, Bob.
General, let's bring into the discussion retired Lieutenant Colonel Kai Thompson of the U.S. Marines, who writes on amphibious matters and is in our Washington studios. Colonel, let's ask you, how do you think this is going so far, given your background and expertise?
Well, I think what General Chris described is right on the mark. The way into Kuwait City and the areas around Kuwait City have, in fact, been cleared as far as offshore problems. Whether General Schwarzkopf chooses to order the amphibious forces to go in to land, of course, is going to depend on how the overall battle develops. The fact that they are offshore and the fact that the amphibious task force is highly mobile does present a serious problem for the Iraqis that are defending in the Kuwait City area. Presents them with a lot of uncertainty, and it may tie up a lot more forces than actually aboard the amphibious ships.
Well, I would take it that even if the general decides not to use those forces, just the fact that they are there gives the Iraqis something that they have to worry about and something they have to defense against. So they must have to devote a certain amount of resources to that project, whether or not General Schwarzkopf decides to use that option.
That's certainly correct. As I say, one of the advantages of an amphibious force is its mobility offshore. And it does serve to fix a large number of defenders in place. Now, of course, if it does turn out that events transpire and they are directed to go inland, then I'm sure they'll execute their mission, as they always have in the past, very well.
Colonel, how complicated an operation is an amphibious assault? We've all seen the John Wayne movies. We've seen the Marines come over the sides of the ships. In Vietnam, I was in a very minor operation like that. It was much more complicated in person than it seems to be in the movies. What all does that entail?
Well, General George Marshall once described the amphibious operation, a force landing in the face of a well-organized and dug-in enemy is perhaps one of the most difficult of all military operations. The key to a success in the amphibious operation is the initiative and the aggressiveness really at all levels, especially at the small unit level. Dan Rather mentioned before about initiative being one of the keynotes of the American Armed Forces. This is certainly true in the case of an amphibious landing. The reason I say this is that there's a certain degree of disorganization, as you say, when the landing initially begins. This is just by the nature of the way the forces come ashore, in platoons and then companies. So it's up to really those unit levels at the lower echelons, the small unit leaders, to carry out the attack as aggressively as possible. And
Colonel,
excuse
me, let me interrupt you for just a moment. Would you just hold it there for a second? We'll come back to it. I'm told that the UN Security Council meeting at the United Nations has just broken Bob Faw is over at the UN, and let's switch over to him for a quick report on what's happened over there. Bob?
Bob, the members of the Security Council met, they talked, they accomplished absolutely nothing, and then they virtually threw in the towel, walking off, adjourning, not even setting a date for another meeting. And during the process, which lasted a little over an hour, there was not even an attempt made for a ceasefire. The effort by the Russians to meld, if you will, the Russian and American proposals was not accomplished. It was not even attempted because it was clear with the ground war that any talk here was academic. Some members, some delegates to the Security Council felt afterwards quite embittered, felt the United Nations had been ill-served, that they had in effect been used by the superpowers. The representative from Yemen saying this was a clear failure of the Security Council, a sad day for the United Nations. It shows, he said, that in the new world order, there is very little role for the United Nations. That is harsh, that is somewhat extreme by a fringe member, if you will, but it nonetheless reflects a view that a lot of people here have. This is not a happy day for the United Nations. Bob?
Bob, I was never clear as to why this meeting went on as it did. Once the president laid out the ultimatum, once it became clear that Iraq was not going to abide by that, what was the purpose of holding this meeting through the evening as the Security Council did?
There's a wonderful line by the Saudi ambassador who was asked the same thing. He said, you know, diplomats will never stop talking. That is what they do. There were some who said, look, this is pointless. Why go through with it? Nothing can be accomplished. The feeling, however, was you've got to do it. You have to keep the channel open, and the off chance something happens or happens down the road. So they went through the motions, if you will, here. But it was an embittered group, in part, that left. The Americans were pleased that nothing rocked the boat, but nonetheless, nothing was accomplished. And there are many here who think the United Nations comes off as the clear loser, used by the superpowers to get an agenda across, and then, as one member said, disposed of.
Okay, Bob Faw, thank you, Bob. We want to go now to Tel Aviv, where Matze Baram, our CBS News consultant, is standing by. And of course, Mr. Baram, your expertise is Saddam Hussein himself. Am I missing something here? It appears to me that at every juncture, at every critical phase of this crisis, that is, as it has unfolded, to the Western mind at least, it seems that Saddam Hussein has made a misjudgment, has made the wrong judgment about what the United States might do, about what the coalition might do. Perhaps it's just something that the Western mind doesn't understand, but why has he made the decisions that he's made throughout this?
Well, I think that he misunderstood you when it came to the very invasion of Kuwait, and he kept misunderstanding you throughout the conflict. He didn't believe you would actually launch the war, start the war. On the 17th of January, he was, in fact, tactically speaking, surprised. Baghdad was lit like a Christmas tree. Now, he was somehow hopeful that your aerial campaign wouldn't be very successful, very effective.
Mr. Baram, hold it right there. We'll be right back. We have to take a station break.
This is CBS.
The Ford truck leadership sell-down continued. 7,000 trucks.
7,000 trucks?
17 days.
17 days?
The best selection ever of F-150s, F-250s, F-350s, 4x4s, and Super Cabs.
7,000 trucks? 17 days?
It's the Northwest Ford Dealers Truck Leadership Sell-Down. Great selection, great prices, but it all ends February 24th. See it at your local Northwest Ford dealer today.
There's a place where you'll find the very idea you've been looking for. A place where you'll find many ideas that will enhance your style of life. At the Portland premiere of Lifestyle Showcase, February 21st through the 24th. Finally, a show dedicated to distinction and discovery. Come find the very idea you've been looking for at the Lifestyle Showcase, February 21st through the 24th. Where else but the Oregon Convention Center?
watching CBS News continuing coverage of the war in the Gulf. From Saudi Arabia, here is Dan Rather.
Bringing you up to date on the war, these are among the headlines of the hour. Ground forces push into Kuwait, possibly into southern Iraq. President Bush speaks to the nation. Pentagon imposes a news blackout. The ground war has begun. The first waves of troops are moving into Kuwait, possibly into southern Iraq. President Bush cut short his weekend at Camp David to say Saddam Hussein is only redoubling his efforts to destroy Kuwait.
I have therefore directed General Norman Schwarzkopf, in conjunction with coalition forces, to use all forces available, including ground forces, to eject the Iraqi army from Kuwait.
Defense Secretary Cheney has clamped a lid on virtually all news of the war. He has suspended official briefings in Washington and Saudi Arabia until further notice. CBS News reporter Bob McEwen, just 1 mile from the Kuwaiti border, reported to us a short while ago that the huge guns of the battleships Missouri and Wisconsin are firing inland into Kuwait and causing literally the earth to shake. Let's check in with David Martin at the Pentagon. David?
Dan, the Pentagon press office tells me they're getting angry calls from viewers who can't understand why we're reporting what we're reporting when the Secretary of Defense has declared this news blackout. And I can only say to people that what we are reporting really, to the best of our knowledge, is not giving away any secrets. I have not been told by a single official here in the Pentagon that we are reporting too much and endangering the lives of troops. And believe me, they're not bashful about telling you that if they think you are. So just to say that to the people who are calling in here to the Pentagon press office. Also, during that brief press conference that Secretary Cheney gave, he said, I think, a very important thing that people need to keep reminding themselves of. He said it is not an objective of U.S. policy to change the government of Iraq. That means that we are not going to go beyond the liberation of Kuwait. If Saddam Hussein falls, so much the better as far as the U.S. government is concerned. But the U.S. government is not committed to going all the way to Baghdad and getting rid of Saddam Hussein. The U.S. government militarily is committed only to getting all Iraqi soldiers out of Kuwait. There's a big difference there, and it means that the war is going to be much, much shorter when you have that limited objective. And of course, every day that you can shorten the war by, almost by definition, is going to shorten the number of casualties, and that, of course, is also a very important objective of this whole operation. The expulsion of Iraqi soldiers from Kuwait with minimum loss of American life.
Thanks, David. As we've mentioned, the goal here now is to keep full pressure on, keep pressuring the Iraqis. Sports analogies do not hold up. In a basketball game, they have something called full court pressure. Baseline to baseline, all over the court pressing. This is war, not a game. But General Norman Schwarzkopf is trying to do exactly that on air, land, and sea. Unrelenting pressure in hopes of getting this over with as quickly as possible with the fewest numbers of casualties. Bill Plant is at the State Department. Bill?
Then the Secretary of State came back here to the State Department after he arrived with the President from Camp David, and he's been making a number of calls to the foreign ministers of other countries, courtesy calls to let them know what they no doubt by now already know, that this ground offensive has started. The allies were informed. It's not clear whether all of them were informed in advance or not. We think probably not. The Secretary of State did talk again this evening to the Soviet Foreign Minister, Mr. Beshmertnik. We are told Beshmertnik expressed his disappointment that the Soviet peace plan was not able to work, but at the same time, we are told that Secretary Baker once again thanked the Soviet Union profusely for its help, for its intercession in this peace process. Now, it's true that there are people in this department who are very suspicious of the Soviet Union's motives, but the Secretary has gone out of his way to be nothing but complimentary to them in public. And I have to suspect, Dan, that one of the reasons is that the administration knows the United States will be criticized for choosing to go into battle when it could have had one part of what it wanted, under some kind of circumstances if it had accepted Saddam Hussein's offer of withdrawal from Kuwait. And the U.S. will want the Soviet Union on its side when that battle comes. That certainly is one reason, in addition to wishing to maintain the best of relations with the Soviet Union. And then we should also tell you that the president's speech was sent out to embassies around the world, along with a note to ambassadors, instructing them to take any additional security precautions they may think necessary. This, of course, a reference to the terrorism which was expected when the war began in mid-January, which is still a very great concern, particularly in many other parts of the world. Dan?
Your plan. CBS News correspondent Eric Ingberg joins us again to profile one of the critical units involved in the war. Eric?
Well, Dan, I think that your sporting analogy that you used a minute ago about basketball holds true here, especially in warfare, in that you don't, when you are attacking an enemy, as the Americans are now doing across the borders, send everybody rushing forward in one phalanx. That generals use the term phasing, that campaigns have to be carefully phased with certain units rushing ahead and others staying behind. And it's always been believed by analysts of military affairs that when the U.S. does mount the land offensive, that one of the units that will likely move ahead of the others is the 24th Mechanized Division. Now, the 24th Mech, as it's called, is a unit that has tanks and also Bradley fighting vehicles and is designed to move very fast against enemy positions. We see them fighting last night in a battle against the Iraqis at night. This occurred across the border, and what particular border, whether Iraq or Kuwait, has been censored by the military. They don't want to give up the exact position of that unit. But in this particular operation, a tank infantry team was moved out to the sand berm, which is part of the dividing wall between Saudi Arabia and its northern neighbors. The troops there were able to use their night vision equipment and infrared equipment. They had sensing equipment that is actually thermal sensing equipment. That is, it can detect enemy soldiers by the heat that they give off. And these indications caused the elements of the 24th Mechanized to move ahead, cross that berm, and try to find these Iraqi patrols. On this particular mission, they didn't find any Iraqis, and they came back. But because of their ability to travel at very high rates of speed, and in fact, some military experts say that this unit could move 200 miles in a day if it had to. Dan, to give you some idea of how far that is for a mechanized unit in warfare, General Patton's longest reach across Germany during the closing days of World War II was 100 miles a day. This unit can go twice as far, and maybe even farther than that if it's unopposed. So that's one of the reasons why it will likely have a key role in the assault.
Thanks, Eric. And our thoughts are certainly with General Frederick Franks, Jr., who commands the 7th Corps up there, of which the 24th Mechanized Infantry is a part. David Martin mentioned before that some people, hearing Secretary Cheney talk about, well, we need a news blackout from the Defense Department, was making the point that the Defense Department is blacking out future information, that most of the information put out here has been widely talked about, widely published by the Army itself. Secondly, that while Saddam Hussein will be no doubt listening and watching carefully, he has the capability of receiving in one set of transmissions, not ours. Another network provides him, he gets their signal in. But even if he hears and sees what's happening here, part of what the U.S. military is doing, they want to unsettle him. They want him to hear how large the U.S. and Allied forces are and what the possibilities are. So when we talk about a great armored sweep through southern Iraq, there's no question, there's never been any secret. That's what General Schwarzkopf intended to do. The question for Saddam Hussein is, where is it going to go? When is it going to go? Is it going to be encirclement or just envelopment? Will it include airborne units, so-called vertical envelopment? All of those things keep him guessing, keep the pressure on him, and are indeed part of the psychological hope of cracking Saddam Hussein and his forces. For example, there's been a lot of talk about the 7th Corps, the 18th Corps, sweeping across the desert as far as the Euphrates River, cutting off the Republican Guard, perhaps even from retreating into Basra. All of those things present situations for Saddam Hussein in which he has to guess. So in that sense, the U.S. military doesn't mind that kind of information getting out at all. It's dawn here in Saudi Arabia, in Dhahran, and just north of here, back over there, the sky is dark from the oil fires of Kuwait. And as we've mentioned from time to time before, particularly in the daytime, you can even smell the heavy odor of the fuel. These are the fires inside Kuwait, taken by a brave CBS cameraman, David Green, along with some other cameramen. Night pictures, you can see more than 200 Kuwaiti oil wells and other installations burning. We mentioned once before that at the end of World War II, Adolf Hitler in his bunker kept asking his generals in Paris, is Paris burning? When Saddam Hussein asked, is Kuwait burning? The answer is yes. The German generals refused to put the torch to Paris, of course, during World War II. But those many fires are causing here 70, 75 miles below that. We not only can see the sky darken and see some of the smoke back there, but also can smell some of that fuel. There was another Scud attack in Riyadh about the time the Allied ground offensive started. Let's look at the pictures of some of the damage that missile did. It's believed a Patriot hit the missile, but as so often is the case, some of the debris and indeed some of the Scud missile itself falls, and in this case, it hit a school in the Riyadh area. So let's take a look at that. The Scud attacks of Saddam Hussein have, by and large, caused minimum damage. We don't know whether there were any casualties tonight or any wounded. The Scud is an unguided missile. It's a very kind of fundamental sort of missile, not like the guided weapons that the U.S. and their allies have been using. But in this case, the Scud reached Riyadh, and at least part of it dropped on a school and in a residential area. We just have to keep trying to find out other details about it as to whether there were any casualties that did cause some damage. Now, as we heard, British Prime Minister John Major spoke to the British people tonight, and Bill Whitaker is in London. Bill?
And it's very early in the morning here. Most people here in Britain and across Europe are asleep now and probably don't even know that the ground war has begun. But the French and the British governments have issued strong statements of support. The statements were released to coincide with President Bush's statement in Washington. The one from the British Prime Minister's office says a massive ground attack has begun to drive Iraq out of Kuwait and secure the full implementation of UN resolutions. It goes on to say that British forces will play a full part in this operation, and we intend to achieve our objective as swiftly and with as few casualties as possible. There's another statement from the French presidential palace. This one is very brief. It says, the President of the Republic has given the order to engage French troops. That is the full statement. And as we know, French troops are indeed taking a full part in this offensive. There's one more statement that we have here. This one from Neil Kinnock, the leader of the Labour Party, the main opposition party here in Britain. And Mr. Kinnock says, now that the ground war has begun, let's hope that it gets over as soon as possible. Now, as I said, it is very early here, but we do expect to have more from the Allies in coming hours. Dan?
Thanks, Bill Whitaker in London. And indeed, British forces are right up jam on the front. Their artillery has been particularly effective over the last few days, and in the early hours of the ground war offensive, the famed British Desert Rats from General Montgomery's forces in World War II. That's part of their tradition and heritage. They're here. The French forces, including the French Foreign Legion, out far west of many of the other Allied forces in the Saudi Arabian desert. Also, the French have had their pilots with their Jaguar very close air-to-ground bombing. Perhaps the most, among the most dangerous bombing runs have been made by the French pilots in their Jaguars and the British pilots in their Tornadoes. Here are headlines of the hour. President Bush launches the ground war. U.S. Marines invade Kuwait in the first wave. Defense Secretary Cheney clamps on a news lid about future information. President Bush announced to the nation tonight that the liberation of Kuwait has entered what he called the final phase. The ground war, he said, is underway. In the initial action, U.S. Marines pushed as far as 18 miles into Kuwait. That was the last report where they were. Thousands of other Marines reportedly were in amphibious craft off the coast of Kuwait, and the Allies are said to have captured a small island that commands the sea approaches to Kuwait City. In Washington, Defense Secretary Cheney said there'll be no more regular military briefings for now, and news about troops and their movements will be sharply limited. He asked for understanding. That's all an effort to protect the troops. Now, another fighting vehicle besides the Army's M1 tank that will play a major role in this offensive is the Bradley fighting vehicle. Perhaps you heard it mentioned several times. Aaron Hayes takes a look at the Bradley in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Dan, we're inside the Bradley fighting vehicle right now. You know, there are two versions of it. This is the cavalry version, and with me right now to explain how it works is Sergeant Mike Caldwell, a commander on this vehicle, one who also trains men on this vehicle. Your primary role, I understand, in cavalry is not to attack, but is reconnaissance. Explain that to me, Sergeant.
Yes, our basic role is to seek, peek, and report where the enemy is, or seek, peek, and attack, depending on the situation. Basically, we would evade the enemy and just report where they're at, where the main body of the battle is going to be, routes that the enemy's taking, obstacles, and things like that.
In a word, you're scouts, I guess.
Right. Our basic mission is to scout for the main body.
What goes on in here during combat? You have 5 men in here.
Right. The two people that would sit here, they play a dual role. They're observers, looking out behind us, letting us know what's behind us and out to our sides. Also to keep our weapon systems loaded, be it I need tow missiles or 25 millimeter ammo or coax ammo.
So it's pretty busy in here during combat, I guess.
Yes, it is.
Now, if they're getting out, they dismount from this door?
Yes, either
this ramp?
Depending on the situation, either they can exit through the ramp or out the back door here.
And I can see that the door is a pretty quick way out.
Yes,
the armor on the Bradley fighting vehicle, Sergeant, isn't quite as heavy or protective as the armor on the M1A1. I guess this is aluminum. It burns a little more easily. It certainly doesn't protect you against some artillery. Why the light armor?
Because of the mission. The tank has a much stronger mission compared to ours. A different vehicle for a different mission. I'm scouting where he's the actual battle tank.
So you have to be light and quick, I guess.
Right. Lighter the faster that I can get in and get out.
Talk to me some about the weapons. I guess you have 3 weapon systems on this fighting vehicle. Even though your mission is to seek and peek and tell, you need to protect yourself. What's moving up right now, this is the tow missile launcher?
Right, this is our tow missile system. This is for tanks, for heavy armored vehicles. We also have the 25 millimeter chain gun, which is for our light-skinned armored vehicles. And we also have the 240 Charlie coaxial machine gun, which is for infantry or wheeled vehicles.
So you mentioned to me earlier your main gun is the machine gun, and you hope you don't have to use your tow missile launcher.
Right. Basically because of the signature that it'd give off, giving away our position. But if we are in the position where we have to use it, then we will.
All right, and as you said earlier, you are the eyes and the ears of the Army on the front line. Sergeant Mike Caldwell, thanks so much. Dan, back to you.
Aaron Hayes, thank you very much. We were with the 24th Mechanized Infantry for a while out here in the desert just before the war started and rode in one of those Bradley vehicles. The troops like them, swear by them in that they know that this is a way to keep up with the tanks. What you frequently have is an infantry-supported tank column, and in the kind of relentless pressure attack, keep it moving, keep the heat on Saddam Hussein that General Schwarzkopf plans, the Bradley is indeed a key vehicle. Aaron Hayes talked about the upside of it, the advantages of it. Some of the disadvantages are it sets a little high on the terrain. Some of the U.S. military people don't like the fact that it sets so high on the terrain. And also at night, the Apache night-stalking, night-killing helicopters sometimes have difficulty picking out what are U.S. vehicles, such as the Bradley, and what are the Iraqi vehicles. That's some of the downside. Joining us now from San Juan, Puerto Rico, is former United States Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Dr. Kissinger, thanks for being with us. Help us put this ground war offensive beginning in some context, some perspective.
President Bush obviously made the judgment, with which I agree, that the offers of withdrawal of Saddam Hussein were so conditional that were he to accept them, the Iraqi dictator would be able to claim that he achieved something with the invasion of Kuwait that he would not have achieved otherwise. And he therefore concluded that there was no other route except to expel the Iraqi army from Kuwait. I think it was a courageous and correct decision.
Dr. Kissinger, what do you make of the diplomatic maneuvering by the Soviets? There are those who believe that Gorbachev has hurt himself very badly in Washington, and particularly with President Bush, by stepping in at the last minute and offering this peace plan. Your views on that?
Well, I think that that Gorbachev attempted to combine a number of incompatible objectives. He tried to maintain his relationship with the United States. He tried to appeal to the 60 million Muslims in his own country, and he tried to maintain at least some standing among the radical Arabs that used to be his allies. For a few days this week, I believe that he was being mischievous and made things very difficult. I think in the final phase, the behavior of the Soviet Union has been restrained, and I do not think that he has hurt the fundamental relationship with the United States.
Dr. Kissinger, now what President Bush calls the final phase has begun, the ground war. How does this end? How do we get what the military people call conflict resolution?
Well, it will, on the military side, we all have to hope and that it will end with the destruction of the Iraqi army in Kuwait. At this point, Saddam Hussein will have fought an 8-year war with Iran and gained nothing, losing hundreds of thousands of people, and he will have occupied Kuwait and have triggered a major clash with the United States, despite the fact that a whole series of very generous offers had been made to him by the United Nations coalitions before the war broke out. So one would think that in any rational country, he would be replaced. The United States has stated that it will have achieved its objective when Kuwait is liberated. We will have also destroyed the major part of the offensive capability of the Iraqi army, so that at that point we can, some sort of ceasefire should be arranged, and a negotiation for ending the war. And if there are any rational people left in Iraq, this is what should happen. If it doesn't happen, then I think we can still withdraw the major part of American ground forces and turn some of the peacekeeping over to the Arab element of the coalition forces.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kissinger. You'll understand when I say we need a station break here. Our CBS News coverage of the war continues. Dan Rather live from Saudi Arabia as the ground war offensive rolls on. Most of the offensive thus far, from fragmentary reports, consists of allied U.S. forces stabbing into Kuwait itself. The U.S. Marines 1st and 2nd Division over near the Persian Gulf on land, last reported about 18 miles into Kuwait. A little to the west of them, still along the Saudi Arabia and Kuwait border. Also action there. We had Bob McEwen, our CBS News reporter, on the telephone 1 mile from the front, saying that the ground was shaking underneath him with great artillery fire and also fire coming in from the sea, from the USS Missouri and the USS Wisconsin. Pan-Arab forces there making their border probes, but so far as could be determined, they were not nearly as far into Kuwait as the U.S. Marines were. To the west of that, even further on the flank, where the main force attack coming somewhere into southern Iraq. That's so U.S. and allied forces don't have to take those well-dug-in Iraqi forces on inside Kuwait itself. There never was any intention, it was well advertised, never was any intention to really meet them head-on. There was going to be this great flanking movement. David Martin reported from the Pentagon earlier that that main thrust movement was believed to have started, but as it should be, much of it is cloaked in secrecy, and particularly during the night hours, it was hard to tell how much of it had actually cranked off. Let's go now again to Dr. Bob Arnott about the contamination procedures for chemical attacks. I suppose I should say the decontamination procedures for chemical attacks. It is widely believed that if Saddam Hussein can fire those chemical-tipped artillery shells at U.S. forces, he will do so. How do they get decontaminated?
But then he has a very sophisticated ability to use these chemical weapons. He has some that linger for just a little bit, so he can use it as an offensive weapon. He has others that are very much more, that last a lot longer. VX is one of them, highly lethal nerve gas to use in defensive sorts of positions. Well, besides complicating the battlefield, it really complicates the care of patients. I'm going to take you through a drill. This is not something that just occurred. This is several days ago. But we'll take you through what, first of all, happens with the medical personnel. They have to gear up. The mask alone, you're supposed to have on in 8 seconds, but the entire dressing here is going to take you about 8 minutes. Now, here's a patient. They have to cut off all of his chemical gear. Before that, they've washed off his suit to make sure that there's no vapor coming up that could possibly injure the medical workers who are with him. They place him on a stretcher. Now, they use a couple of different decontaminants. One is to soak the nerve or mustard gas out of the skin. The other is to deactivate it. Finally, now, he's ready to go in for further care. And you can see that this has delayed his care by what? 5-10 minutes. So with a life-threatening injury, and they're going to be complex injuries. Someone may have a blast injury, some shrapnel, and the chemical. It's going to make a real life or death difference. Plus, it's going to back up the operating rooms. It'll back up triage, back up the emergency rooms. So it's a nuisance on the battlefield, one that the forces can deal with, but it's a disaster in the hospital.
Yeah, let's hope and pray that it doesn't come to that, although we know that some U.S. forces will be moving in the early stages in their chemical protective gear. What about the biological warfare? Now, it is chemical, but I'm thinking of such things as the anthrax that the French sold to the Iraqis. That falls in a different category than the mustard gas, for example.
Well, it's the one that people fear the most because you can't detect it ahead of time. There's a state of readiness where they're looking for more flu-like illnesses to say, gee, we think there's some anthrax out there. Now, there is a vaccine the U.S. forces have been given. We've given our own people antibiotics to take in advance as a prophylaxis. And there is a treatment, but you have to give it very early when you have those flu-like symptoms, because anthrax is a terrifying disease. Once it gets into your lungs, it has a 98% fatality rate, and it's a horrible death. So because you can't detect it, because you don't know it's there, it's something that soldiers are really very worried about. And the medical personnel in the field, they don't have the infectious disease people out there to determine, yes, we see it, we're worried about it. So that's number one. There are others such as typhus and plague that he may use, but they're all highly treatable. The key is what we call epidemiology, to be able to do a wide enough surveillance to say, yes, we're starting to see a problem. Let's take the blood samples, see what it is, so we can move ahead and treat it. But it's a real threat, and it's something that worries not only the soldiers, but worries me about our own people in the field.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bob Arnott. Emphasizing that the U.S. troops with whom we've spent as much time as we can in past weeks and months, while they were concerned about the possibility of chemical attack, they had prepared. They felt they were well equipped, and they were drilled over and over again as to how to deal with chemical attack if it should come. We're going to take a break now for just a moment in our CBS News coverage of the ground war offensive. We'll be back in about 10 or 15 seconds, in some cases a bit longer, as our coverage of the Gulf War continues.
This is
the Ford Truck Leadership Sell-Down continues. 7,000 trucks.
7,000 trucks?
17 days.
17 days?
The best selection ever of F-150s, F-250s, F-350s, 4x4s, and Super Cabs.
7,000 trucks? 17 days?
It's the Northwest Ford Dealers Truck Leadership Sell-Down. Great selection, great prices, but it all ends February 24th. See it at your local Northwest Ford dealer today.
Put your finger right there. And now put your other one right there. Then grab the lightsabers.
Lifesavers candy. Isn't life delicious?
Hand in here. And then you put one finger in here. Put this finger in here. Got it?
Got it. Lifesavers candy. Isn't life delicious?
Police investigate a fatal shooting in Portland's Chinatown at 11.
You're watching CBS News continuing coverage of the war in the Gulf. From Saudi Arabia, here is Dan Rather.
Dawn as the first day of the ground war offensive rolls on. The ground war is raging, and these are among the headlines. President Bush says the war is entering a new phase. Ground troops move into Kuwait, maneuver along the Iraq border. Iraq remains defiant. President Bush told the nation tonight, quote, the liberation of Kuwait was entering a final phase. And the president said he's ordered Iraq ejected from Kuwait, his word. Ground troops have started trying to do just that. They are reported at least a dozen miles inside Kuwait and possibly inside Iraq. Marines last reported 18 miles into Kuwait near the Persian Gulf. There are reports of some Iraqi soldiers giving up, but the Defense Department says don't be misled by that. An Iraqi spokesman at the UN tonight said, and I quote, Iraq will never surrender. Baghdad Radio's first news broadcast of the morning said not a word about the start of the ground offensive. In Washington, Defense Secretary Cheney has placed a lid on any future official news of the war. He did talk about what led up to the ground assault.
Final decision, of course, to go forward wasn't really resolved until it was clear today that the deadline had come and gone and Saddam Hussein had refused to comply with the UN resolutions.
One Pentagon source is describing the ground war as, quote, the end game. As you can hear in the background, aircraft taking off from the big base here in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. They have been doing it in wave after wave, air-to-ground attack aircraft, and then interspersed with transports headed north toward the front with resupplies of such things as ammunition. Let's go to the Defense Department for an update from David Martin. David?
Dan, the soundbite that you just ran from Defense Secretary Cheney saying that the absolute final decision wasn't made until after the expiration of the noon deadline, I think we probably need to expand on that a little bit because the chronology that is now available to us makes it clear that this night and 8 p.m. were picked several days ago as H hour. And it has been the plan for some time now to start the ground offensive at 8 p.m. tonight. And in fact, we are told that after the 12 noon deadline expired, President Bush did not have to make any additional calls to General Schwarzkopf in the field. He knew, because of previous communications, that once that deadline expired, then it was a go, and only some extraordinary action by the president would change that. Now, earlier in the evening, we had been speculating that perhaps these reports of atrocities in Kuwait City, the reports that civilians are being rounded up and perhaps even executed, might have pushed the U.S. to go sooner than it had originally anticipated. But this chronology that is now available to us would seem to rule that out. It just happened to be that tonight was the night, just as these reports of this scorched earth policy were really starting to mount.
David Martin at the Pentagon. Wyatt Andrews is at the White House. Wyatt?
Dan, we are learning here at the White House some historically significant details about why it was exactly that the president gave up the relatively risk-free, obviously there were casualties, I say relatively risk-free air war to go to this very potentially bloody ground offensive. And what is emerging here is a picture of a president very driven, not by any of the politics that we've seen swirling around for the last week, but by the recommendation of General Norman Schwarzkopf to go, as David Martin just described, at H hour, 8 p.m. Tonight. What's important about that is that there wasn't anything about the Soviet initiative. Again, as David mentioned, nothing about the torching of Kuwait or any of the reports going out of that. Rather straight military dogma about when Norman Schwarzkopf thought he was ready. And that helps explain why the president, with the Soviet peace plan in his hand last Thursday night, decided to go for the noon deadline of today, because he knew that his commander in the field wanted to go tonight, Saturday night, and he wasn't going to let anything short of an Iraqi withdrawal stand in the way from that. One more significant detail here, Dan, and that is you've heard the president and Marlin Fitzwater for weeks now say that the war is on schedule and all is going to plan. Tonight, a senior administration official says, while that's still pretty much true, he acknowledged that the air war, the length of the air war, has been rather surprising to the White House, that they did not expect the air campaign to take as long as it did. Certainly not 5.5 weeks. They wouldn't give a date of exactly when it was, but they didn't think it would go 5.5 weeks. And that what delayed the progress of the air war was the intensive search for the Scud launchers once it was clear that Saddam's game was to try to get Israel into the war. So once again, Dan, the picture emerging here is that this decision was not driven at all by politics, and that when Iraq failed to live up to the president's ultimatum, it was an all-the-way go with the advice of his military commanders. Dan?
Thanks, Wyatt. A reminder to our viewers that the information on the progress of the ground offensive is very limited. In many cases is limited for good reasons. Defense Secretary Cheney announced earlier that official Pentagon briefings are being suspended for the time being. News reports from the field are also deliberately non-specific on many details, all of that to protect the lives of U.S. troops operating in the battle zone. There is censorship here in the battle zone, and part of the message from the Defense Secretary tonight was very clearly that the censorship, again, understandably, will get tighter for at least the time being and for the foreseeable future. American soldiers, of course, are anxious in the early stages of the ground war. Anyone would be under their circumstances, but by now, they know the plan. They know where they're supposed to go. The Iraqis, in their defensive stance, have less to go on. They know that they're being attacked, but they don't know exactly how, and they certainly didn't know when it was going to start, and they don't know what the offensive plan as it unfolds, what it calls for. Another important weapon as the ground war begins is the Kiowa helicopter. Bruce Hall shows us one. Bruce?
And one thing that we do know is that the helicopter, the OH-58D, is going with the troops right in the front. And in reality, the OH-58D becomes the eyes of the troops. And with me is Chief Warrant Officer Charles Greeley. Why and how does this helicopter help the troops as they go?
Well, Bruce, the way it helps the troops is up here on top we've got an MMS process, or MMS, and it's like a periscope. And what it does is it allows you to be defecated or hidden from the ground like a sand dune or a sand trap, and you can look and see the enemy without being detected. At nighttime, we have a thermal imaging sight system, and it allows you to see during the night, and also during the daytime we have a TV. Along with that, we have a laser that helps guide smart bombs into prime targets.
We have helicopter practice, which is going on right next to us now, and then people may be able to hear that. But this helicopter really then can just sort of hover behind these berms that we've been hearing about, peer over them and take a look at the troops and give advance warning to the ground troops, right?
Yes, sir, Bruce, it sure can. And it allows you to go ahead and look at the enemy at nighttime without being detected. And that's the most important thing for our survivability at nighttime, is to be so we cannot be detected during the night and day.
Well, for some people who see this, it almost looks like a traffic helicopter, but it certainly is not. It is a helicopter with a lot of high-tech equipment. Tell us about what some of this is used for.
A lot of this equipment in here is basically for process. It's a processors back here, just like you would have on your home computer. And all the processors are back in here and allows the pilot to access through a screen up front in the cockpit. It's all computer generated and allows us to use our inertia nav system in there, and also lets us look through pictures as far as the MMS is concerned, and also...
it's a very high-tech operation.
Yes, sir, it sure is, Bruce.
Okay, what we have here then from this particular helicopter, which by the way carries no armament, so no weapons, they just act as the eyes of the advancing army. Dan?
Bruce Hall, thanks. Our CBS News coverage of the ground war offensive underway in the Gulf will continue after these messages.
When the war is over and Kuwait is liberated, then what? Were they really worth fighting for? That's what Steve Croft went to find out at their capital in exile. 60 Minutes, Sunday.
Trapped in a real-life nightmare of multiple personalities.
It's like having amnesia, not knowing who you are.
There's only one way out, a harrowing journey through her own past. The Many Faces of Marcia, a special 48 hours, Wednesday at 10, 9 Central and Mountain.
There are 9 symptoms of leukemia. And one very good reason we're pointing them out. Because with an early diagnosis, your chances for survival have never been better. Check with your doctor about persistent signs. The Leukemia Society of America. We're gaining every moment.
Hello, I'm Edward Woodward. Fortunately, for most of us, childhood was a happy time of discovery and hope. But for millions of tiny victims of abuse, childhood means loneliness, fear, and broken trust. The National Committee for Prevention of Child Abuse believes there is a role for each of us to play in ending this tragedy. Please write for information on how you can help. And let's make sure that every child has an equal chance at childhood.
I didn't always talk about my diabetes until the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation started talking about a cure. And with these determined people, it isn't just talk. You see, as the leading force behind diabetes research, JDF has already helped reduce diabetic blindness, kidney failure, and heart disease. But to cure diabetes, JDF needs to talk to you. So please call 1-800-JDF-CURE, because there is a cure, and together we'll find it.
Live from Saudi Arabia, our coverage of a desert ground war which involves in one way or another an estimated 1 million fighting men and women continues now with Bob Schieffer in New York talking about with our military consultants. Bob?
Dan, one of the interesting things we were talking about here in New York as we heard that report from Wyatt Andrews was the revelation that the air war took longer than officials believed. And General Bob Wagner, former tank commander, is here with us. General, why would that be? Why would the air war take longer?
I sort of divide the air war into 2 parts. The first part was eliminating his command and control, air defense capacity, and his air force, and also major installations in Iraq. We did that with great facility. There's enormous difference between targeting that kind of array and taking out a field army which is dispersed, dug in, and ensconced in armored vehicles.
Does that lead you to believe that there's still a good-sized fighting force up there?
I believe there is a good-sized fighting force. In fact, the numbers boggle the minds. They have over 4,000 tanks. Our major missile system is the Maverick missile. So you have 4,000 direct hits on his armor, or 2,000 direct hits to take out 50% of his armor. I believe that a lot of armor's left.
General, we've talked a lot about the weapons, the machines of war. One of the things we have not talked about are the men inside those machines very much. And you hear a lot about fighter pilots, the split-second decisions they have to make. But down on the ground, it's becoming a very fast-moving operation down there, too, isn't it? What is a young lieutenant who's commanding a tank platoon? What kind of things does he face, and is he facing tonight? What kind of decisions is he making?
We call tankers, Bob, are the fighter pilots of the Army. Here is a young platoon leader. He is 23 years old. He is in the command station of an M1A1 Abrams tank. He is the lead platoon leader of the lead company, of the lead battalion, of the lead brigade, of the lead division in this attack. If he gets lost, if he goes astray, if he falls off communications, if he is not prepared to execute a whole series of lethal killing battle drills in a split-second basis, that entire attack can go wrong. The pace of operations, speed is emphasized. You can imagine, we're mounted, they're mounted, closing speeds in excess of 60 or 70 miles an hour. A target calls in artillery, maneuvers his platoon. It just demands incredible intellectual preparation.
Well, here's a picture of the tank that those young lieutenants command. And you know, General, one of the things that we civilians find astonishing about all this is that that thing weighs about 65 tons, I guess, and it can go 45 miles an hour. Just the idea of something that weighs that much staying on the ground and going at that speed.
It drives like a hot rod. And to give you an analogy, right here in New York, if you're driving your private automobile down a road and you're closing in on the ubiquitous McDonald Hamburger's arch, imagine that there's an enemy tank platoon under that arch. You're at a closing speed of 80 miles an hour. Hot lead is bouncing off the turret, and in a microsecond, you've got to be prepared to execute a whole series of lethal killing battle drills, or you'll die. That's the kind of leadership it demands.
So all of the split-second decisions that are made around the battlefield are not made by the fighter pilots. They're made by some of these fellows on the ground as well.
Bob, I could not agree more with that statement, sir.
I had a feeling you'd say that.
Yes.
Dan, back to you.
Thanks, Bob. Keeping in mind that standard military doctrine almost worldwide is that the attacker would prefer to have a 2.5 to 1 advantage. That isn't possible out here for U.S. and Allied forces to have that 2.5 to 1 advantage over the Iraqis. General Norman Schwarzkopf and the other commanders are hoping and betting that their immense superiority, their absolute supremacy in air power and their ability to fire and maneuver will make up for the shortfall in what would normally be the ideal attacker to defender ratio. Here are war headlines of the hour. Operation Desert Storm now full-blown. Defense Secretary Cheney warns the task ahead is formidable. Kuwaiti Island reported taken in the early ground victory for the U.S. Marines. It controls the access to Kuwait City Harbor. President Bush escalated Operation Desert Storm tonight into an air, sea, and ground war. The president told the nation in a brief talk that this is the final phase of getting Iraq out of Kuwait. Defense Secretary Richard Cheney described it as a major military operation against a well-equipped, well-fortified opponent. That's a direct quote. Cheney said that he would not want to underestimate the fighting that lies ahead. In early action, tanks rolled into Kuwait, and a Marine amphibious effort was maneuvering just off of Kuwait. This was after the Marines captured that key island, Fauca Island, and in what is seen as an early military victory, Allied forces reportedly captured the small island of Pelaka, commanding the sea approaches to Kuwait City. Whether the Marine amphibious force is actually going to land on Kuwait or at the moment is part of a diversion, we'll simply have to wait and see, and we may be a long time finding it out. The offense that has been launched by the United States, spring-loaded for so very long, now the trigger pulled on it, is a combination of the old and the new. Eric Ingberg is here with a description of part of the old.
Dan, there are two legends in this fight already. Two battleships, the Missouri and the Wisconsin, have been involved in shelling positions in Kuwait for at least 4 weeks. And according to CBS newsman Bob McEwen, who reported to us a short time ago from just a mile short of the Kuwait-Saudi Arabian border, one of those battleships is again pounding those positions where the Iraqi troops are dug in Kuwait. Now, the Missouri and the Wisconsin are both about 50 years old. They're World War II vintage ships. We have some file pictures that were taken earlier in the war of them firing both in the daytime and at night. These ships can have just incredible firepower, Dan. They fire 16-inch shells. Each of those shells weighs 1,900 pounds, which is about the weight of a small car. And one of the advantages of a battleship, of course, and here's firing at night, I believe this is by the Missouri in an earlier action in the war, is that a battleship, unlike an airplane, can stay on station 24 hours. It doesn't have to come back to refuel. It doesn't have to worry about weather conditions. And I think, combined with McEwen's report that there are battleships firing, and now this new report that the Navy and the Marines appear to have fought for Pelaka, this would indicate to me that the likelihood of an amphibious operation in Kuwait itself, I think, probably gains a lot more credibility. If they're firing the battleship guns out there, it looks to me like the Marines are getting ready to move.
Well, Eric, with the firing of those big guns of the Missouri and the Wisconsin. I'm thinking about Captain Bill, who commands the Wisconsin. Here was a bona fide, certified hero of the Vietnam War. He fought some hellacious battles in the River War, far up the Mekong River. Had at least one boat, and it was a river boat blown out from underneath him. He explained how General Walter Boomer and the Marines planned to put a pincer movement, if General Schwarzkopf ordered it, a pincer movement on Kuwait City with one Marine force driving, smashing up the land, just on the coast, and the amphibious forces coming in from the other way. Now, as you say, the capturing of this island gives it a little more credibility. We'll have to wait and see, maybe a long time before we find out whether it turns out to be a feint, a kind of diversionary course. Let's go to Hattie Kaufman of CBS this morning. She's with families at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Hattie?
Dan, it would be difficult to find anyone in the Fort Bragg, Fayetteville area who is not directly connected with this war effort. Now, throughout the day, the family members of servicemen here have been filled with anxiety, some of them glued to the television, watching every news development, while other ones seem to try to ignore the passing of the deadline at noon. But tonight, there was no ignoring it.
Saudi Arabian desert can clog its suspension system.
Outside Fort Bragg, word spread slowly through the crowd. The ground war had started.
Hussein's been trying to play both ends against the middle all along. He tried to play the Israelis, and then he turned to the Russians, and he lost.
I wish I was there, ma'am. I expect this happened a long time ago. I think we waited too long. He's been stalling a while. It doesn't surprise me. It doesn't scare me.
Go ahead and get it over with and bring the boys and women home.
Fayetteville is the home of the 82nd Airborne. Many in this bar and restaurant have relatives on the front line.
My son's in the 82nd. He's right on the Kuwaiti borders. I'm sure if it's begun, he's right in the midst of it.
And I think the perfect thing for Israel to do to get into the war is put the A-bomb on Baghdad, and we'll end it.
Strong words from a community that has shown very strong support for Desert Storm. You have to realize 30,000 troops were deployed right here from the Fort Bragg area, and true, the war began in January, but that was really the war of the Air Force, and for so many of the family members around here, their war began tonight with the ground troops. Dan?
Hattie, we've spent some time in the last few weeks and over the last few months with the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne, and we can report to you that their morale was extremely high as they waited on the cusp of the ground war that has now begun. Our CBS News coverage of the ground offensive will continue. Live from Saudi Arabia, Dan Rather with the CBS News team reporting on the ground war offensive. General Norman Schwarzkopf, known as a planner, known as a man who plans his work and then works his plan, trying to keep relentless pressure, land, sea, and air on Saddam Hussein. General Schwarzkopf had an offensive plan that had been worked out over many months. He's believed now very methodically working that plan. One of his goals is not to get thrown off, not to be thrown off in any way as the plan unfolds. Joining us now is Joshua Epstein of the Brookings Institute. Thank you very much for being with us. What can be going through Saddam Hussein's mind at this moment?
To say, he had a chance to go home with a lot of the marbles, in my view. Had he withdrawn before the ground attack, he might have gotten out with much of his army intact, with his person intact, and with his regime intact, and I now think that's rather in doubt. One question is whether he will initiate the use of chemical weapons, but beyond that, I don't know really what's going through his mind.
Saddam Hussein has a whole lifetime pattern of being a survivor. Can you think of any script, any scenario in which he comes out of this a survivor?
Sure. The scenario is we restore the border of Kuwait, and that's it. If we literally are going to restore the border of Kuwait, then we have not sort of changed the long-term power situation in the region. And I think this is one of the very much open questions about this war that we now have to face. Are we really going to try to unseat Hussein, change his government, and annihilate Iraqi forces, Remember, there are 24 Iraqi divisions north of Baghdad that are not in play, and people talk about this war as though the liberation of Kuwait, as it were somehow a solution to the long-term problem of Iraqi military power. And that is not the case. You really can't have it both ways. If you're really going to crush Iraqi power, it will not suffice to liberate Kuwait. Among other things, you have to destroy the Presidential Guard, which is not in Kuwait proper, but is in southern Iraq. And if we really want to change the balance of power for the long term, liberating Kuwait will not be enough. And I think the administration should face that, and we should have an open debate about that.
What about President Bush? Why push so hard?
I think, despite what we've heard recently about General Schwarzkopf's timetable, there's sort of the myth of the sole alternative here. No general would give his president one and only one attack time as an option. It's probably true that General Schwarzkopf saw this as his optimum attack time, but there were certainly fallbacks, and the reason, in my view, President Bush took this one over the fallbacks were political, not military. I think he saw enormous pressure for some sort of diplomatic solution arising, and I think clearly Hussein was caving toward the U.S. position. He hadn't reached the U.S. position, but many of his earlier demands had been dropped, demands about the Palestinian question among them. I think, to put it sort of bluntly, I think they were afraid that peace might break out, and they didn't want that. They want to crush Hussein, they want to crush the Presidential Guard, and they want to change in the political complexion of Iraq. And that could not be brought about by diplomatic means alone.
You make a good point that the Presidential Guard, the so-called Republican Guard, is not in Kuwait. It was, but it was pulled back. It's now positioned right along Iraq's border with Kuwait, and part of the General Schwarzkopf plan, very well known, is to sweep in to southern Iraq rather than make some massive frontal assault on Kuwait, and to try to either get the Republican Guard to come out and fight in the desert where our air power could be leveraged, or to pound them from positions inside Iraq.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most elegant attack, as it were, would be a very large envelopment, even to positions north of the Presidential Guard, and then come crushing down on them from above. Obviously, that represents a bigger logistical problem than attacks that take a more direct course against the Presidential Guard, and it remains unclear which of those is the preferred approach at this point. But they are the main event. They're the main target. Among other things, I would add that if they could be destroyed, it might not be necessary to use amphibious forces in Kuwait City at all. That would be a very bloody campaign and should probably be avoided. It would be door-to-door combat. Our air power couldn't be brought to bear. Tanks can't really operate in the city. And my suspicion is they'd rather not do that. They'd rather choke the city off, crush the Presidential Guard, and tell the forces in the city, it's game over, surrender.
Thank you very much. We're going to go quickly now to Susan Spencer in Riyadh at Central Command Headquarters. Susan, we just have a few seconds. What about the information flow?
Well, we were talking about the restrictions earlier. We have now found out that there's going to be a 48-hour news blackout, that at least in the case of the Army, all combat footage will come here to Riyadh, where the Central Command will screen it and then release it. So, in fact, it could be up to 3 days before the public actually sees any of this war, Dan. The other thing is that the French have decided that they're not going to be bound by this. They're going to hold a press conference in about 4 hours, and I suspect it will be very heavily attended.
Susan Spencer in Riyadh, thank you very much. We'll be back after a word from our local stations now. The situation at the moment is the ground war offensive is well underway. It may take as much as another 36 to 48 hours for all elements of it to develop. And with the news blackout on, it may, as Susan Spencer pointed out, be days before we know actually what is happening.
This is CBS.
Acura buyers update from Oregon's low-price leader, Ron Tonkin Acura. This week, you'll find over 100 Integras at Oregon's largest Acura dealer, Ron Tonkin Acura.
Take your choice of 10 Integras, all at one low price, $11,995. Now's the time to buy your Integra.
And at Ron Tonkin Acura, you'll get immediate delivery, on-the-spot financing, and terms to fit your budget.
That's Ron Tonkin Acura out Canyon Way, Oregon's low-price leader.
Toyota buyers update from Oregon's low-price leader, Ron Tonkin Toyota. The news at Ron Tonkin Toyota is Corollas. Fully equipped four-door Corollas for only $84.49.
We have over 40 Corollas in stock, 10 at this price. Look what you get for only $84.49.
And at Ron Tonkin Toyota, you'll get immediate delivery, on-the-spot financing, and terms to fit your budget.
Come to Ron Tonkin Toyota, Oregon's low price leader.
You're watching CBS News' continuing coverage of the war in the Gulf. From Saudi Arabia, here is Dan Rather.
Here are the headlines of this hour. U.S. and allied troops begin the ground push into Kuwait and perhaps into southern Iraq. The Pentagon clamps a lid on virtually all news from the war zone. The French say that they're going to brief. Iraq answers with another Scud attack into Saudi Arabia. Part of a Scud hit a school in Riyadh. What President Bush calls now, quote, the final phase of Operation Desert Storm is well underway and unfolding on the desert that is the border between Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq. American and allied troops massed on the border between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. They've begun to move into occupied Kuwait. Details are hard to come by at this hour since the Pentagon has blacked out almost all information, saying that it did not in any way want to endanger U.S. troops, U.S. news organizations, or cooperating. An Iraqi Scud missile struck the capital of Riyadh, the Saudi Arabian capital, doing some heavy damage to what appears to be a school. There are no reports of injuries in this latest missile attack on Riyadh. There are now reports that President Bush made up his mind some time ago that the moment of attack, if possible, could come on Saturday night, Eastern U.S. time. Among the reasons were what Mr. Bush called Iraq's scorched earth policy inside Kuwait. Latest reports from the Pentagon say that as many as 300 Kuwaiti oil wells may have been destroyed or are still burning. And our independent reporting, David Green, up on the border, has sent back some pictures of the Kuwaiti oil fields burning. Bob McEwen, who reached us by telephone as the ground war offensive began unfolding up there, reported the ground was shaking underneath him as artillery and the big guns of the battleships offshore pounded the border area. He also could see the bellowing smoke from the oil wells set aflame. Doug Tunnell is in Amman, Jordan, monitoring Radio Baghdad. Doug, what are you hearing there?
Dan, we've just had first word from Radio Baghdad that the ground offensive is underway. The Iraqi radio has finally told Iraqis of what's beginning to happen. In a communique that interrupted their regular programming, a voice was heard to say the following, and I quote, "Dear brave fighters, you are now entering the mother of battles," using the phrase that Iraq has used to describe this war from the very beginning, but it seems to have taken on some new urgency. The communique said, You shall continue your strikes against, quote, the enemies of mankind. Iraqi men, it said, are not the type to make concessions. The radio broadcast also said that Iraq has been prepared for a day like this, a day never witnessed in history for a long time. The communique also said that tell the enemy with your weapons, you shall fight with the simplest weapons against the most destructive. So we finally have from Baghdad Radio first word that the ground offensive is underway, Dan.
Thanks, Doug. David Martin is at the Pentagon. David?
Dan, just a short while ago, you and Eric Engberg were talking about the seizure of this island called Failaka Island at the mouth of Kuwait Harbor. And I guess this is typical of the kind of confusion we're going to have in the coming days during this news blackout when no official information is available. My information is that this island was actually seized, or a good portion of it was actually seized on Friday. And that was, again, confirmed to me as early as Saturday morning. Yet now the Kuwaiti news agency is reporting the seizure of that island as if it had just been taken. So we have conflicting reports here that vary a span of 2 days over exactly when that island was taken. And I think that is the kind of stuff we're going to have during these next 48 hours. Susan Spencer in Riyadh mentioned that she had been told that there would be a news blackout for 48 hours. That is exactly the time period that officials here have been talking about for the last several weeks, saying that they had to keep the movements of some units secret for 48 hours so they could get where they were supposed to go. So We are going to be at the mercy of rumors and half-truths as long as this blackout continues. But I have to tell you that the calls I've been getting here, somebody in the Pentagon gave out the number here. The calls I've been getting here, it doesn't seem to bother the American people at all.
Well, and understandably so. It may be worth mentioning that even if Saddam Hussein had the Allied plan, even if he had it up on his wall in his bunker, it's doubtful he could do very much to counter it, according to U.S. and other Allied commanders here, because he is fixed. He's made his bet on dug-in defensive positions, and General Schwarzkopf and his forces are moving and plan to keep moving as part of the effort to keep constant pressure on Saddam Hussein's forces and to outflank them. Dr. Bob Arnott has been trying to keep us up to date on the medical aspects of the war, what preparations and what planning has been made. Once casualties began, it is inevitable. Americans, we know, are fighting in situations now where some will be killed and some wounded. How does the evacuation procedure work?
It's a little different from Vietnam. We learned about the golden hour there, that hour where if you can pluck somebody from the battlefield, take them to a hospital, you can probably save their life. In Vietnam, with very brave pilots, they could go right almost to the site of the battle. The fear here is that because you have the flat open expanse, because you're so exposed that it's going to be difficult to get all the way up to the front. Now here we see a patient loaded into a helicopter. We filmed this before the war actually began. We spent a day with one of the helicopter companies. See the terrain here, Dan? They have to fly at maybe 50 feet over the ground. There's tremendous danger to these pilots. They have radar altimeters to look down, but they may miss with the abrupt dune coming up. There have been 4 helicopter accidents so far. Some of these may be due to weather conditions. They're trying to put in new navigational equipment, but the bottom line is that these are some of the bravest people in the theater. They're willing to fly. And I found out the other day that they're going out there at 16 feet over the desert because there's missile lock at 16 feet. They'll actually go down to 4 feet to try and get out of it. So you can imagine 100 miles an hour over the desert, terrain you can't see, flying at night, trying to save lives. The problem is, of course, that some lives unfortunately have been lost of these very brave aviators and of the passengers that they have taken with them. But it is a tremendous effort, and we expect that the helicopter evacuation system is going to be a big part of getting these young men back in that golden hour to save their lives.
Thanks, Dr. Bob Arnott. As helicopters are an integral part of the attack, the Iraqis, remember, are in fixed defense positions, and even if they had our campaign plan, they couldn't do much to change the course of events. They can only guess, as we did earlier, about the way the campaign might unfold. And indeed, U.S. military sources have been putting out a lot of information about the campaign, how it could unfold, as part of their campaign to, 1, convince Saddam Hussein what a powerful force he's facing, and 2, to keep him guessing. Of course, only General Norman Schwarzkopf and his top staff knows for sure which way the great Allied ground offensive is going to unfold in coming hours. Let's go now to Esme Murphy of WCCO-TV, who's with a support group of families for servicemen. Esme?
Well, Dan, this small apartment in Eden Prairie, Minnesota has become something of a command center of sorts for the families and loved ones of 4 servicemen in the Gulf. Danette Lehman is with us now. Her husband is a combat engineer with the Army. Danette, I know you're concerned that your husband is on the front lines. What are your thoughts right now?
I'm scared for him, and I hope he does a good job. They should have went in, and I believe in what they're doing. And I just pray that they all make it out safe.
Thank you, Danette. Julie Steen's husband, Kevin, is an artilleryman with the Army in Saudi Arabia. What are your thoughts right now?
Relief and fear and just ready to go in, get it done, and come home.
There was a lot of talk with the Soviet initiatives and also last-minute flurries at the United Nations that possibly there could be some more negotiations, yet we went ahead with the ground war. What are your thoughts about that? Should we have waited or should we have gone ahead with the ground war?
No, they absolutely did the right thing. They were stalling for time. They scudded Saudi and Israel. They gave up their right to the 12 o'clock time. They were messing with us. They went in, they did it, and they got it done.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, thank you, Julie. And Christina Grotberg's husband is with the Marine Corps in Saudi Arabia. With her also is Mark Grotberg, who's only 2 months old. He was not even alive when his husband when his father left for Saudi Arabia. Christina, what are your thoughts right now?
Well, we're in shock what happened, but we know we knew it was going to happen. We're behind our husbands 100%, and we're scared, but yet we know that if our husbands were here, they wouldn't want us to be scared. We know that that's what they're there for, is to defend our, we just know that's what they're there for.
Okay, thank you very much. The small group of women has been together for several days now, watching news reports, trying to comfort each other, and that's really the way they've been getting through this, going through it together. And while it takes obviously a lot of bravery to be on the front lines and fighting in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, it also takes a lot of bravery to have to watch it all unfold on television. Dan, back to you in Saudi Arabia.
Thanks. If it's any consolation, and it may not be, General Norman Schwarzkopf and his commanders have long made it clear that the Iraqis, once the ground war has started, will be under constant pressure. The kind of constant pressure they had during the air war has now been increased as the land offensive begins to unfold. Unrelenting pressure is the secret to the Allied attack success and is the key to getting a quick victory if there can be such a thing. Let's take a break. We'll be right back.
What do you look forward to? Dating, driving, sports, graduation. Alcohol can damage your health, grades, your social life. Alcohol-related highway accidents are the biggest killer of America's teenagers. And the younger you start using it, the more likely you'll become addicted to it. You have a lot to look forward to. Don't let alcohol ruin what you want most. A message from the National Citizens Commission on Alcoholism.
Randy Travis on strings. Branford Marsalis on the horn. Paul Schaefer on keys. Carly Simon on lead. There are a lot of different parts to play in the American Red Cross. Play your part.
When your father and I were married, sex was a very different.
I can tell by looking at her what she's gonna say.
We dated for a while before he even had the nerve to kiss me.
They went to a soda fountain and shared a straw. Oh, true love.
Well, to my mind, you kids have so much more to deal with than we ever even had to think about.
So much for the intro. Here comes the good stuff.
Sex is a natural thing between two people who love each other.
Fast forward through pregnancy and nice young men.
A young man who will respect you and who will...
Fast forward through marriage and babies.
To become a happy and joyous mother.
And now for the closing remarks.
AIDS is one of them.
Wow.
There are risks in becoming sexually active. AIDS is one of them. Teresa, let's start at the beginning. HIV is the name of the virus that causes AIDS.
We can help you talk about AIDS. Call for a guide.
Synchronization, very important at this hour as the Allied ground offensive rolls on. The United States and its allies are trying to achieve a combat power advantage by the properly timed arrival and concentration of forces at decisive points. And while we don't know where those decisive points are, everybody said going in, from General Schwarzkopf on down, that the synchronization of the attack will be critical to its success, particularly in the early hours and days. Let's go to New York now, where Congressman Robert Torricelli is joining us. Congressman, thanks for being with us. Do you think there's any doubt that Congress will back all of this, even when the casualties begin coming in, which has to be fairly soon now?
I think, Dan, that Saddam Hussein has succeeded in uniting both the Congress and the country to an extent that has rarely, if ever, been seen. The combination of his Scud missile attacks, the oil in the Persian Gulf, and now what appears to be a virtual genocide in Kuwait City, I think have let people know of something about who we're dealing with and the fact that what is being done really is something for which we had no choice.
And what about the danger of a wider war?
Well, Dan, I think that at this point, the way the administration has handled the coalition and communication with other nations in the region, there is some considerable confidence in George Bush personally and in the administration. During these next few days, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any real divisions in the Congress or in the government generally about how this is being conducted.
Now, this was the case in the early stages of the Vietnam War as well, and we know that later it, to say the least, got frayed around the edges. Your assessment of what the chances are of that happening this time?
Well, we went through months of members of Congress trying to create every possible analogy with Vietnam. But from the performance of the military to international support, none of them have held. And my guess is at this point, there are less and less people talking about Vietnam and more talking about other analogies in history. We've been far more successful in recognizing that, that this is one where this country's holding together and performing well.
Congressman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Storylines of the hour. The Allied ground offensive well underway now. It began on President Bush's orders about 5 hours ago. President Bush vows that Iraq will be, quote, swiftly and decisively driven out of Kuwait. Baghdad's only known response, a Scud missile fired at Saudi Arabia. The Pentagon has shrouded this final phase of Operation Desert Storm in secrecy, understandably so. Details are hard to come by. There are some battlefield reports. As Allied tanks and artillery opened fire all along the war front, the Kuwaiti news agency reported the capture of a small island commanding the sea approaches to Kuwait City. This gives more validity to reports that a marine amphibious landing might be near, but there's some belief that that could turn out to be a feint or some kind of diversionary action. Inside Saudi Arabia, Patriot interceptors brought down a Scud missile. The debris caused some damage in Riyadh, but so far as we know, no injuries. At the United Nations, Iraq's ambassador predicted a long, tough fight and said his country will, quote, never surrender. Britain's domestic news agency, the Press Association, reported that the Allied forces were engaged in a complicated series of diversionary tactics and feigned assaults to deceive Iraqi commanders. This is all part of General Schwarzkopf's plan of keep him guessing, keep on the move. Arab military sources in Riyadh, reached by telephone from Bahrain, said the coalition forces pushed in 3 assaults from land and sea into Kuwait and 1 from Saudi Arabia into southern Iraq. These sources spoke on condition that they not be identified. Bob Schieffer joins us now with our military consultants. Bob?
Hearing Congressman Torricelli talk about Congress trying to draw analogies between Vietnam and Saudi Arabia, certainly it is hard to imagine, General Bob Wagner, 2 battlefields more different than the battlefield in Vietnam and the battlefield where this enormous operation is taking place. You were in Vietnam. It's a much different ballgame.
It absolutely is.
We have taken, CBS News has put together an animation display showing what that battlefield looks like, working with models and a lot of special effects and the modern television technology. We're going to take a look at it now just to talk about what this battlefield looks like. And what we have, 2,000 tanks, I guess.
That's right, 2,000 tanks, 2,000 M1A1 Abrams tanks.
And those flat top vehicles there, what are those, General?
Those are scissor bridges, AVLBs, that will take us over these tank obstacles that we hope we don't face.
And these are some very difficult obstacles for a tank to overcome. I think the first one we're going to see on this animation as the camera moves across the desert floor here is what we've come to know as a berm, this piled up sand. Now, General, I want to ask you, when we're all little boys playing with tanks in the sand pile, the tank goes over a pile of sand like that. Why do you want to go through that rather than over it?
Because when you play that game, Bob, you have a weak underbelly, and that round can take you out.
So that's when a tank is most vulnerable.
That's
when
right.
It's up
and it also slows up that momentum I was talking about.
Now, here is another of the obstacles. These are these huge ditches, sometimes filled with oil, we're told, that can be set afire. As the tank goes past that, then comes the barbed wire. Is that a problem for a tank to go through?
Barbed wire is not much of a problem, but usually in that barbed wire you'll have a lot of anti-tank mines.
And that's what we saw.
And that's what you have next. And then, of course, you run into the major positions. But this kind of position you would divide your task force into 3 teams. You have a breaching team, fundamentally engineers, dismounted probably to go in and detonate this. Then you have your support team, direct fire, tanks backed up, firing at the enemy, indirect fire and air going in, and then your assault team. So when they effect the penetration, you zoom through at flank speed to get through as soon as possible. But the best thing to do is get around these things and force them to pull out.
Now, what we're seeing here is, of course, the prize, and this is where the enemy forces are concentrated. Back in here, they have their artillery. We're told that in this network of ditches and bunkers, some of them are concrete reinforced. Once you get there, what do? You just charge in with the tanks, General?
Once you effect a penetration, you charge in. The thing that we can do at speeds is fire as accurately as we can as a move. So mobility in a situation like that is very important. But this is sort of a Maginot Line complex. Those kinds of fortifications don't work. We will get around most of those fortifications and we will force him out of them. This is really our basic battle plan.
Not very much like Vietnam.
No, sir.
All right. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Bob. Quoting Britain's domestic news agency, this is a British report now. The U.S. 2nd Marine Division and the 18th Airborne Corps have both stormed over the border into eastern Kuwait. And to the west, U.S. Army troops moved into Iraq in a flanking operation. This is according to the British Press Association. If this is true, you can bet that as those armor units move into southern Iraq, they have it in what the truck drivers call the company hole. The whole idea, which is to say the fastest gear they have, because the whole idea is to keep moving unrelenting pressure on the Iraqis and keep them guessing, which General Schwarzkopf so far has been able to do. Eric Ingberg is here with another report from the front. Eric?
Ken, we're getting a little bit of a feel now for what it was like in the hours just before H hour. We've heard from our own Bob McEwen, who was the first reporter, I think, to report the activities of the American troops on the eastern part of this front. Now, pool reports from some of the officially sanctioned Pentagon newspaper and television and radio pools are beginning to arrive here. And one of the things that I guess won't surprise old veterans is that even though they've been 6 months in the field, it came as a surprise to these troops when they got the order to move to the front. Now, these are units of the 82nd Airborne Division getting ready to move to their jump-off points. The pool reports indicate that the orders to move to some of these units came early Friday, and that they had to get all of their equipment together very rapidly and move to the point where the assault was to begin. One pool report says, just behind these front lines, the desert crawled Saturday with thousands of trucks carrying semi-trailer loads of artillery shells, along with thousands of gallons of fuel and water at one improvised road to the front. Dan?
Eric, we'll get back in a moment with more of that reporting direct from the front. But right now, we're going to take a break as our CBS News coverage of the ground war offensive continues. Stay here with us.
Good evening, I'm Ken Body. Here's a local news update from Newsroom 6. For at least one Oregon congressman, the start of the ground war left him feeling both sad and angry. The sadness, says Mike Kopetsky, is for the men and women who may die in what will be a bloody ground war. The anger aimed at Saddam Hussein, who Kopetsky says has no regard for human life. In Washington, Greg Hirakawa has the story.
In a quiet office tonight, Oregon Congressman Mike Kopetsky said, "It is time now more than ever to support the president and to support the American troops fighting in the Middle East."
I have some very good friends whose children are in the Gulf. I know some of them. I'm worried about them, their safety. And so I think as I'm just another American this evening is very worried about our sons and daughters over there.
The freshman congressman had once asked for patience on behalf of the president, but tonight wasn't about to second-guess what he believes was a military decision. The blame for the ground war, he says, rests solely with Saddam Hussein, adding the Iraqi leader has made what will no doubt be one of the greatest mistakes in history.
By allowing the action to continue is that he has no regard for life. He's not a leader. He should have never become the head of a government because he knows that he's lost this war and he's going to commit his own troops to certain death.
There's obvious sadness in this town tonight, sadness that a diplomatic solution could not be reached. But many believe this country could only wait so long, and time eventually had to run out for Saddam Hussein. Greg Hirakawa for Newsroom 6, Washington.
The ground war to liberate Kuwait may put the Kuwaiti people still there in even greater jeopardy. In January, Newsroom 6 introduced you to Andrea Hansen and her 5-year-old son, Zach. They came to Portland to stay with Hansen's mother after escaping Kuwait. But husband and father Salem was not able to find safety with his family. Dale Emanuel reports he is now part of the Kuwaiti resistance, and his family watches coverage of the war tonight with apprehension.
There are reports, as I say, I can't confirm, but from Kuwaitis that men over the age of, or boys over the age of 13, and men, apart from the elderly and apart from women, are actually being rounded up in Kuwait.
Those words are haunting Andrea Hansen. She spends much of this day watching, hoping, and feeling very alone.
I was watching 2020, and they had just a quick shot that they said was a smuggled tape from Kuwait, a smuggled video, and it was just 2 seconds. It was very quick, and they went over, and there was a man in the very front of the protest, and it looked just like him. It felt good to know everything's going okay and that he's still there, but I suspect it could be a very old tape, because those demonstrations were going on when I was still there.
Andrea understands by watching television reports more than most. She and her family used to live in Kuwait. She says she can understand, too, the horrible damage done there. She also worries about the emotional damage of her son.
It's getting harder and harder on him. Every day he says, I miss my dad, or when's my dad coming home? And
these pictures depict the Hansens' return. Zach tackles his grandmother, overwhelmed. But his emotions were more than just simple joy.
What day was that when they took that picture? Where did we come from?